Live on the ground. And thank you for joining us. Happy Sunday. Welcome to America's News Headquarters from Washington. I'm Elizabeth Pran.
Wow, what a morning it has already been. I'm Leland Vittert. And it has been a war of words this morning. President Trump's tweets going after a leading Republican senator. And now we have a heated response. James Rosen, North Lawn of the White House with more. Fair to say, James, in your years in Washington, unprecedented, correct?
The precedent has already been set by this president in some previous encounters just during the course of this first term of his. Perhaps the only thing placing Senator Corker in a slightly more enviable spot than past recipients of the president's Twitter fury is that Senator Corker has already announced his intention to retire. Senator Bob Corker begged me to endorse him for re-election in Tennessee, the president tweeted shortly before 7 a.m. I said no, and he dropped out, said he could not win without. The president continued 9 minutes later, my endorsement. He also wanted to be Secretary of State. I said, no thanks. He's also largely responsible for the horrendous Iran deal. Hence, I would fully expect Corker to be a negative voice and stand in the way of our great agenda. Didn't have the guts to run. It's a shame, the Foreign Relations Chairman responded an hour later. The White House has become an adult daycare center. Someone obviously missed their shift this morning. Now, other allies of President Trump, as we were just discussing, in his cabinet and on Capitol Hill have found themselves the object of his Twitter targeting. But in some of those cases, and indeed in Senator Corker's case, it would appear the president didn't fire first.
I think Secretary Tillerson, Secretary Mattis, and Chief of Staff Kelly are those people that help separate our country from chaos, and I support them very much. And I don't know what he may have said after the briefing.
Corker's reference at the end there was to Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who called a news conference last Wednesday to deny reports he has contemplated resigning. Tillerson also dispatched a spokesperson to deny he had privately impugned the president's intelligence. Mr. Trump yesterday dismissed all of that as fake news, even as he aired another criticism of his Secretary of State.
We have a very good relationship. We disagree in a couple of things. Sometimes I'd like him to be a little bit tougher. But other than that, we have a very good relationship.
Now, the president is enjoying this overcast Sunday at his resort in Northern Virginia. Vice President Pence, by the way, is in Indianapolis attending the ongoing 49ers-Colts game. A bit of a rapprochement between the White House and the NFL. Leland.
Well, we have certainly come a long way since President Trump played golf with Peyton Manning and Senator Corker just a few months ago. James Rosen on the North Lawn. Liz has a little bit more. That's
right. For more perspective on this Twitter feud and other issues, of course, facing the Trump administration, let's bring in Peter Nicholas, White House reporter at the Wall Street Journal. Thank you so much for joining us, Peter.
Good to be with you.
I have to get your reaction. You've seen a lot of things as at your time with the Journal, but I'm not sure you've quite seen anything like this.
No, I think this is pretty unprecedented. What's unusual about it is that Bob Corker was an ally of President Trump. The president considered him for the position of Secretary of State, also for Vice President. Corker flew on Trump's campaign plane in 2016, got to know the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, really well. So they were friendly, they were allies. So to see this falling out is really unusual. And you wonder what it means for the president's legislative agenda, because he's already at odds with Mitch McConnell and also with John McCain. So can he afford to lose another prominent Republican, Bob Corker, chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee?
That was sort of one of my questions as we move forward. How will this impact how he works with Congress? Because, like you had mentioned, he's hugely influential.
He is. And the president needs Republican allies, and more than ever, he has had trouble getting his agenda passed. We saw health care crash and burn, and now he wants to get tax reform through. So it's just the timing of this is unusual. Politics is a game of addition. You know, you want to make more friends. You want to bring more people into the tent. So to be pushing Bob Corker away makes no strategic sense.
I want to segue a little bit. We heard OMB Director Mick Mulvaney on Sunday Morning Features this morning. He addressed a number of topics. He brought up health care. He did bring up tax reform. And I'm sort of curious, what do you foresee in the future when it comes to, and I'll start with health care. We saw that he's positioned poised to take executive action. We know that obviously he's rolling back some of the regulations on contraceptives with the employer mandates there. But I'm curious, as he chips away at the law, what are his intentions for future laws, if you will?
Well, it looks like he's reaching out to Chuck Schumer. So he tweeted over the weekend that he's had a phone call with Chuck Schumer, the Senate Democratic leader, to try to see if they can revive health care, to see if they can come up with some alternative plan. So it seems like he's giving up to some degree on the Republican coalition in Congress and realizing that he has to get this done with Democratic support. The challenge and the complication there is Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, leading Democrats are not going to go for a repeal and replace of Obamacare. That is crucial to them. So whatever they come up with is probably going to be some sort of compromise that preserves elements of Obamacare. So that in turn could alienate some Republicans. So this is a tricky legislative game that we're seeing from him.
It sort of seems like there's a lot of juggling and a lot of pieces, a lot of balls in the air. And I could see Sarah Huckabee Sanders saying we can walk and chew gum at the same time, because a lot of reporters have said, well, you're talking about health care, you're talking about tax reform, and yes, a budget blueprint has passed in the House and it's come out of a committee in the Senate, but it hasn't passed reconciliation yet. There's a lot of balls in the air. We can't really talk about tax reform until that budget is set. And we said we wouldn't talk about tax reform until health care was done. So what's going to happen this fall?
Well, the president's eager for a victory of any kind. So he has promised to be a consequential president. Tax reform is one of the cornerstones of his campaign. So he has to really deliver on that. Health care failed. So now tax reform is what's left. The problem there is that there are some Republicans who aren't going to like this plan. It calls for for example, the state and local property tax deduction that it would do away with. There are many Republicans in some wealthier states in the House who are not necessarily going to go for this. And they're also concerned about the deficit, that this plan relies on the idea that growth is going to be so robust that it's going to take care of the deficit, and we won't necessarily see a problem with that. But that relies on assumptions that even some Republicans and certainly many Democrats are not going to subscribe to. So tax reform really is up in the air too. It's hard to see it's going to be a complicated path forward. That is no easy lift.
Yeah, you've heard a lot of critics hit on the deficit, and they've hit on that growth. You know, how much growth for how long? There's a lot of unanswered questions, and so we'll certainly have you back when we have those questions, Peter.
Always happy to be with you.
Thank you very much. Leland?
And a Fox News alert as Nate has been downgraded, but is still awfully dangerous after making landfall in Mississippi overnight. Now Tropical Depression Nate moving inland. Phil Keating live on the ground, Biloxi, Mississippi, where it made landfall. So Phil, looking behind you, is this now the calm after the storm?
Pretty calm, absolutely, but it's a whole lot of cleanup going on all along the Mississippi coastline. 12:30 a.m., that's the official moment of landfall of Hurricane Nate as a Category 1, packing 85-mile-an-hour winds. And as we had reported all day yesterday, and all of the experts said, the storm surge was going to be big. In fact, it was about 3.5 feet in the Hard Rock Casino and Hotels parking garage. We have video from early this morning, cars and trucks that had basically parked in the garage for safety from flying debris suddenly became halfway submerged underwater. All of that water that surged up from the Gulf quickly receded. It was a fast-moving storm, but the Golden Nugget Casino and Hotel down the street also had anywhere from 6 to 8 feet of flooding in its garage. But the good news for those casinos, nothing inside the casinos proper. Now, last night, as those battering and howling bands of wind and rain from the eye wall made the approach and arrival on the Mississippi coastline, we were out on the seawall. You can just see the waves were churning, splashing. The storm surge came in, and that really was the most dangerous aspect of it, leading to many people having to basically get to higher ground faster that they didn't, and regretting that they didn't do it earlier. Today, a lot of cleanup. US 90 and many, many long stretches. That's the coastal highway connecting Biloxi to Gulfport remains closed. There are numerous dump trucks, backhoes, bulldozers scooping up all of the sand from the storm surge that pushed the sand and silt and sea debris all the way across both sides of that highway. And as this day progresses, the FEMA director, Brock Long, says the Deep South has a lot to be concerned about as well.
So you have to add that forward speed to the maximum sustained winds of the tropical storm. And so what people are going to see are basically hurricane force winds moving through all of Alabama and into Tennessee and western North Carolina.
Now, again, the FEMA director made that comment earlier this morning. National Hurricane Center has since downgraded Nate to a tropical depression, but that's still a lot of strong winds and a lot of pummeling rain and punishing. It's going to be a miserable day for a lot of people weather-wise, all the way in the south and moving northeastern as Nate moves up there. So today, maybe several more hours of cleanup all along the coastline, but really, city leaders, county leaders, emergency managers all thinking, you know, it was a Category 1 storm, and we'll probably have about 1 day of cleanup and get things up and running. Thousands of people have lost power, but the utilities are working to get that restored in both Alabama and Mississippi. And the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino, they have the right by the Gaming Commission to reopen whenever they're ready, and they say that should be this afternoon when they get done cleaning up.
Right. And it looks like New Orleans certainly dodged this one. Phil Keating there in Biloxi. Phil, thank you. Liz has more.
Meteorologists. Is a storm headed now. Meteorologist Adam Klotz is tracking Nate as it moves northward. He is the latest on the storm's path.
Hey there, Liz. Yeah, this storm now off the Gulf Coast, running into portions of Alabama, but folks across Georgia, even farther north, are experiencing it currently. Winds still at 35 miles an hour, and still that fast-moving storm moving north-northeast at 24 miles an hour. That's going to be a big part of this story going forward because it just doesn't hang around in any particular location all that long. Here's our forecasted track of this. You begin to see it moving up to the north quickly, down across the Piedmont of the Carolinas, up into eventually the Mid-Atlantic, and then running out to sea across the Mid-Atlantic and then the Northeast, and that only takes us into late Monday and Tuesday. So this is entirely cleared out here by early in the week to the middle of the week. So this is a fast-moving storm system, but the folks still in the way of it. Well, here's your future radar. We're looking at some of these outer bands of rain, still with some strong winds moving across portions of northern Alabama and Georgia. It does run up there through the Piedmont eventually by early tomorrow morning, and there's your timestamp, 5 a.m. on Monday. We're going to be talking about rain moving into D.C., Philadelphia, eventually up its way into New York City, and that is all going to be Nate related here in the next couple of days. Now, this is still where it's sitting, at least at times, dropping some pretty heavy rain. That's why there are still flood advisories in place. These are all watches, so we're not looking at any flooding right now, but the conditions are there, and there's still enough moisture in this system that flooding could occur. We're talking about, again, at times there's going to be isolated areas where the rain comes down heavier. Widespread, just a couple of inches, but you're looking at certain areas there where you're getting these deeper reds. That's getting up to 6 inches, maybe even 8 inches of rain. If there's some training involved there, that's going to be an issue. So rain is going to be one of the things we're paying attention to with this system. And again, here we are, now that we're kind of getting on the backside of this. Here is your hurricane season. So obviously things should be winding down right now, but it's been such an active one, Liz. Boy, I hope this could be our last one. We're just going to have to wait and see.
I'll say, I heard you emphasize should be, right? It should be winding down.
Should be winding down, but it's been so busy for so long now.
It has.
Yep.
Adam Klotz with the very latest. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Leland?
Well, part of the president's Twitter attack this morning on Senator Bob Corker included blaming him for the Iran deal, a deal then candidate Trump said he would rip up. The president faces a deadline 1 week from today to either recertify Iran's compliance with the deal or kick it to Congress. One of the people he would kick it to, Florida Congressman and member of the Foreign Relations Committee, Francis Rooney. Nice to see you, sir.
Thanks for having me on.
Fair to say there's not a big pro-Iranian constituency in Congress right now. If this does get kicked to Congress, if the president decertifies it, what are your guys' options?
Well, one option is, of course, to impose sanctions, and in the hope that that would bring Iran to the table to talk about some of the defects in the agreement that we've all talked about and would like to see remedied.
Supporters of the Iran deal say, look, you can't put the genie back in the bottle, and if all of a sudden the U.S. unilaterally imposes sanctions, Iran turns to Europe. Our allies aren't prepared for that. They think Iran is complying with the deal. Is it worth it for the U.S. to go it alone on this?
Well, Trump can actually do some pretty interesting things. He can decline to certify, which has no legal import, but is a good message to Iran. And then we've got a whole bunch of reasons we can put sanctions on Iran, which relate to them firing up ballistic missiles, developing a cruise missile program, and continuing to develop their Hezbollah Shiite linkage across Iraq and Syria.
We heard from Reuters yesterday that the Iranians have said they may be willing to deal on their missile program, specifically citing the tough talk from President Trump. Are you hearing anything from your folks about how the Iranians are now looking at President Trump and dealing with the United States versus dealing with President Obama?
Yeah, well, just like North Korea, I'm not an appeaser. I believe strong, clear definition of U.S. strategic interest, backed by words that indicate that we're willing to protect them, is what's kept our country safe for a long time. We haven't had this much vacillation and weakness out in the world since Neville Chamberlain.
And to your mind, you think the world's taking note of this new president, the new sheriff in town, so to speak. Speaking of North Korea, put up this tweet from the president yesterday. Presidents and their administrations have been talking to North Korea for 25 years, agreements made and massive amounts of money paid. Hasn't worked. Agreements violated before the ink was dry, making fools of U.S. negotiators. Sorry, but only one thing will work. Conceivably, the one thing he's talking about is either military action or at least the threat of it. Agree or disagree?
Absolutely. We have to show a credible threat to use force if necessary to defend American interests and stop this guy from developing his nuclear program. We've sat and watched 3 successive presidents talk, occasionally give money, and all it's done is embolden the Kim family. The other thing is, if I were president, I'd say to Kim, I'm not talking to you anymore. You want to talk to somebody? Talk to China.
Well, right now, the North Koreans don't seem to be talking to us at all. We heard that yesterday, or last week at least, from the Secretary of State, and then also from the president, basically saying the Secretary of State's wasting his time if he tries to talk to the North Koreans. Don't want you to share anything classified, but you all get some pretty interesting briefings. We hear all of this sort of really bellicose language from the North Koreans. They look through their dictionary all the time to come up with a new word to call the president or to call the United States. Behind the scenes, do they seem to be a little bit worried about what President Trump is saying? Have they changed their behavior behind the scenes at all?
I believe there's a little more behind the scenes worry and paying attention to what the United States is saying. I've heard that through some intermediaries that have had meetings with them and have know people that have had meetings with them. And I think China's talking to them more than we know. You know, China's come on board with the UN resolution. They've come on board with sanctioning banks that do business with North Korea, cutting off imports from North Korea. There's a chance that with China we could solve this without nuclear or without military work.
All right. Well, Congressman, appreciate you being here. Thank you very much for your insights. And I think next Sunday we'll have some things to talk about either way.
Thank you very much for having me, Leland.
Good to see you, sir.
Okay.
Liz?
All right, this is a Fox News alert. Vice President Mike Pence has just left the Indianapolis Colts game after football players took a knee during the national anthem. The vice president tweeting out, quote, I left today's Colts game because POTUS, obviously the president, and I will not dignify any events that disrespect our soldiers, our flag, or our national anthem. Per an aide, members of the San Francisco 49ers did kneel during the national anthem. This game is a fairly high profile, with former Colts quarterback Peyton Manning being honored at halftime for his 14 years with the team. But this is sort of what we've seen when the president began this, I guess you could say, crusade, was that the folks have the option to either get up and leave, or they have the option to turn off the television. And this is sort of an example of
the vice president
doing so.
Voting with his feet as well.
Right.
Bring Congressman Rooney back in here for a second on this. Your thoughts, all of a sudden, for the vice president to get up and walk out of a game, and it's significant also because it was Colin Kaepernick with the 49ers who started this whole thing.
Yeah. You know, I think that actions speak louder than words, and I'm so proud of the vice president for putting his morality and his values in play and making a physical act.
Well, and you also have to think, conceivably, that the vice president thought about this ahead of time. They knew what they were going to do one way or the other, and probably wasn't lost on the 49ers players who decided to take a knee, who was in the stands as well. Congressman, thanks as always.
Thank you for having me.
Listen.
All right. Coming up, we're going to take a closer look at President Trump's vow to tackle health care reform, including work with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. Plus, we're going to have our political panel break down the battle between President Trump and late-night TV. Why the president is calling for equal time against criticism of him, and, of course, the other side of the aisle. And remembering the victims of the Las Vegas massacre, a prayer service is going on right now. This as investigators dig deeper into the past of the shooter. Our own Will Carr has a preview from Las Vegas.
Hey there, Liz, and along with the remembrance is the sound of a massive cleanup after the largest mass shooting in modern United States history. We'll have all the details coming up.
President Trump not giving up on his promise to repeal Obamacare. He says he's willing to pursue a temporary deal to get a new health care plan in place. Kristen Fisher joins us now with the very latest. Hi, Kristen.
With Democrats, he's also continuing to chip away at his predecessor's signature health care law. Now, the latest example of that, according to the Wall Street Journal, is an executive order to be signed this week that would expand insurance options for Americans who buy coverage on their own or work for a small employer. It would also direct federal agencies to explore ways to loosen regulations and potentially lower premiums. Now, this comes just 2 days after the Trump administration announced a new rule that would expand exemptions to the Affordable Care Act's contraceptive mandate, and 1 day after President Trump announced that he'd reached out across the aisle to Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer to try to cut a deal on a health care bill. Now, he was asked about that call as he was leaving the White House yesterday. The president said he'd proposed a temporary deal, one that involved the federal government handing over money for health care directly to states in the form of block grants. Listen.
So basically, if we could do a 1-year deal or a 2-year deal, as a temporary measure, you'll have block granting ultimately to the states, which is what the Republicans want. That really is a repeal and replace.
And there is a precedent for a bipartisan bill. I mean, who can forget the debt ceiling deal with Chuck and Nancy? But this morning on another Sunday show, Republican Senator Ron Johnson said he wasn't worried about it.
If people really want to do a deal, they are going to have to come through a Republican House and Republican Senate. I've been talking to House members to try and get what we would require to fund what we all believe are collapsing markets under Obamacare.
But make no mistake, talk of a deal with Dems on health care has certainly unsettled some Republicans on Capitol Hill, and right at a time when President Trump really needs them if he wants to pass the largest tax cuts in U.S. history. Liz.
All right, Kristen, thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right, this is a Fox News alert. We have brand new video of Vice President Mike Pence leaving the Indiana Colts, and I believe it was the San Francisco 49ers game just moments ago. He left that game because there was a number of players who were not standing during the national anthem. He did tweet out not long after, "I left today's Colts game because at POTUS and I will not dignify any event that disrespects our soldiers, our flag, and our national anthem." So this just goes in line with a culture war that we've been seeing going on. We have two of our esteemed political panelists here with us, Dan Cannonen and Alexandra Smith, to react to this very latest. Thank you both for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
You have to wonder. We've seen a number of football players obviously take a knee, and we knew the vice president was going today. We knew there would be some type of reaction if those football players did not take a stand. So Dan, I want to start with you. Something that we could have predicted, perhaps?
I think so, and I think they did predict it. I'm almost certain that they were there for this reason. It's actually great politics, I think, if you're the vice president, to go there. You know this is going to happen. You know we'll talk about it. We're talking about it right now. They'll probably talk about it in NFL halftime shows on all the major networks covering games. So from a political practitioner standpoint, maybe a little of a hat tip. I will say it's a bit hypocritical. There are fans not standing all the time. There are fans getting a beer during the national anthem. There are folks who are disrespecting it, to use his term, all the time. This is a peaceful protest that is entirely to demonstrate a conversation in this country about serious issues. For him to go there and just walk out and just pretend as though there aren't serious issues being raised, I think is hypocritical and disingenuous.
Hypocritical? What do you think, Alexandra?
So I'm going to be anti-Washington for a second and not be cynical and think that the vice president is like a lot of other Americans who just want to enjoy a football game on a Sunday. This is sort of like America in a nutshell, right? You have these players who are, sort of taking a stand and making, their political views known. And then you have the vice president on the other hand and other fans who are sort of walking with their feet. They're voting with their feet in terms of leaving these games or turning them off in response to that. And so I think that, our country would do a little bit better if we could all understand each other better. I think that the people who are confused or angered by these protests would do better to understand maybe what the players are concerned about. But I think that the Hollywood left, I think that the just sort of the sportscasters out there, the media, should understand also why this is so offensive to so many Americans. So I think that the vice president and the president are actually giving a voice to a lot of people who feel like they haven't been heard on that.
Dan, we had Congressman Rooney on earlier, and it was right when we saw the vice president walk out, we asked his reaction, and he said actions speak louder than words, and the fact of the matter is, when we see some of these numbers for these NFL games, they are going down, and fans are burning uniforms. I mean, they're making their voices heard too.
Look, a protest by its very nature is designed to make folks uncomfortable and cause a reaction and a conversation. I agree with Alexandra. I think that if Americans would take a moment to say, why is this happening, and let's listen to the perspective
But is
we
that going to
disagree
happen?
with. I think it's very hard to do, but this is how it happens. You have conversations like this rationally. Look, this is not a violent protest. It's not threatening anybody. It is doing something that makes us take a step back and question what's going on and have a dialogue. That's really vital to who we are. I think it's exceptionally patriotic. I think this move by the Vice President, maybe he wanted to watch his Colts game, but as you said in the beginning, this is something that we could have predicted happening. Yeah. I think he knew it was going to happen. I think he knew we'd talk about it, and I think he knew the NFL network would talk about it.
All right, I want to shift gears to one more topic I want to get to. Alexandra, I want to start with you. We talked a little bit about how NFL said their ratings maybe aren't quite as good as they are, and we've heard the president mention that some of the late night TV shows are also not seeing the numbers that they have seen in the past. So you have two sides to this argument, because some are saying, well, politics fits really well in late night TV. That's when people want to watch it. What do you think about that? What do you think about the feud between a lot of these late night hosts and the president? Is it a distraction? Is it something that we should sort of not play into, if you will?
So I agree. I think that there's always been a historical lightheartedness to the political situation out there. We've seen late night hosts take on presidents from both parties or leaders from both parties. I will say, though, that there is a scent of hypocrisy in some of these late night hosts' monologues. For example, we learned this week that Harvey Weinstein, who has been accused by several women of sexual harassment, terrible details that have come out in the New York Times, and we have not seen any of the late night hosts comment about that. We have not seen them moralize on this in the same way that they have chosen to on health care and on gun control, for example. And so I think, the fact that there are politics involved in the Harvey Weinstein situation. For example, the DNC has only donated back 10% of what Harvey Weinstein gave to them over the last couple of decades, and gave it to another political action committee. I could see why people are frustrated. I could see why the president is frustrated.
All right, Dan, I'm going to let you respond. We're running out of time.
Well, look, I think that it's certainly the case that some shows in LA and elsewhere have a perspective. But I'll say this: Harvey Weinstein isn't an existential threat to most Americans. Taking away 9 million kids off of the CHIP program is a big threat. Taking 23 million people off of Obamacare is a big threat. I think it's fair for them to moralize these big national issues. And sure, I'd love it if someone would take a shot at Harvey Weinstein and not just say, "Oh, I knew this happened for 20 years. Of course, it's despicable. But honestly, I'm glad that people are raising big issues and talking about them in settings where most Americans see them.
And what it sounds like, the president's really arguing that he's just getting really so much criticism as opposed to both sides of the aisle.
He is the president.
He is the president. That's right. All right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mourning and paying their respects to the 58 victims of the Las Vegas massacre, but after yet another mass shooting, there are still new questions about how to prevent these attacks. We're going to be speaking with the former head of the ATF when we come back after the break. Stay with us.
We pray for the people of Las Vegas, and we pray for our nation, that the words sung by thousands before the shots rang out that fateful night might be ever more true, that God would bless America.
Country star Jason Aldean performing Tom Petty's I Won't Back Down at the start of last night's episode of Saturday Night Live. Aldean paying tribute to the late rocker as well as the 58 victims of the Las Vegas shooting. Aldean was performing in Vegas last Sunday when gunman Stephen Paddock opened fire on that crowd. Of course, the shooting in Las Vegas sparking a major debate over gun control and the use of aftermarket devices like bump stocks. It's led to even some of the strongest Second Amendment advocates to call for an examination.
We don't believe that bans have ever worked on anything. What we've said has been very clear, that if something transfers a semi-automatic to function like fully automatic, then it ought to be regulated differently.
The ATF originally okayed bump stocks under the Obama administration, but now faces calls to change its ruling. Joining us now, former ATF Director Bradley Buckles. Also noteworthy that you're the former general counsel as well. Unique perspective on this. Is it just that easy? Could the ATF tomorrow say, well, bump stocks, we view them as illegal, therefore they can't be sold anymore, or is there more to it?
Well, it's a couple of things. It's not quite that easy because it requires that bump stocks be brought within what the existing law is, and that is ATF can only regulate parts that convert a rifle into a machine gun. So that's got to be the legal test of whether it does that. And a machine gun is specifically defined as something that will fire more than one round with the single function of a trigger. So the technical question is, does a bump stock cause a firearm to fire more than one round, or does it simply accelerate?
And conceivably, the ATF can make its ruling, and then even if the NRA doesn't want to challenge it, any gun owner can file a Second Amendment challenge to it, which brings us to the next issue, that the slide fire group that makes the most popular form of bump stocks, they're sold out of them. The secondary market prices for bump stocks are going through the roof because people are worried they're going to be banned by the ATF or perhaps legislation in Congress for which there is some support. Is it ever possible in your experience of the ATF to take things away? It seems as though you can regulate them being sold in the future, but taking them away is a much tougher thing.
Well, it is a difficult thing, obviously, once products are out there. In this case, a change in an ATF ruling doesn't just kind of create some new regulation. It would actually treat bump stocks as machine guns. And as machine guns, there's felony laws for possession of a machine gun. There are forfeiture, seizure and forfeiture laws that come into play if someone owns a contraband machine gun. So any change in the ruling would immediately change the status of those bump stocks from being accessory parts, unregulated, to being machine guns under the federal law.
And one has to, of course, imagine that in any type of situation like this, the old ruling would be used against the ATF, for that matter, in any court challenge. All this comes back to, after any one of these mass shootings, people say, well, how could it have been prevented? Let's plan for the future. Take a listen to Steve Wynn, casino magnate, on Fox News Sunday.
We had to cover every exit and every aspect of the building to see if we could identify and preempt any kind of terroristic or violent action. It's never perfect, of course. But what you can do, to use local vernacular, you can change the odds, I guess.
Him talking about changing the odds. Is it possible in a free society to change the odds completely?
Well, you can't change the odds completely, but obviously everything you do in some way changes the odds somewhat. We have speed limit laws that don't stop all traffic accidents, but I think most people would say you better have speed limit laws or you'll have more accidents. And the same would be true of certain types of firearms. Obviously, as a country, we've decided that machine guns shouldn't be in general circulation. And it's fair to say that the Congress could decide that certain other kind of objects shouldn't be in general circulation, not because they can prevent everything, but it does change the odds. It reduces the likelihood.
All right. Appreciate your time, sir. Thank you very much. Liz?
Still ahead, the future of the DACA program, how the White House is tackling the immigration question. We'll have the very latest coming up. The New York State Attorney General is suing President Trump for putting an end to DACA for now, saying he's hopeful the president will work with Democrats on an immigration solution. The Trump administration says it will roll out new core immigration guidelines in the very near future. Let's bring in Mark Krikorian with the Center for Immigration Studies, obviously an expert on the issue. Mark, thank you for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
First and foremost, tens of thousands of young immigrants obviously reapplied for DACA. That Thursday was the deadline. I've read some of your work in the past, and I want you to clarify something for our viewers, because it's sort of a moving goalpost between DACA and Dreamers, that they're actually two fairly separate definitions, if you will. Why is that so important for us to realize?
It's important because there's overlap, obviously.
Right.
But the DACA population, that's a program President announced, and it's a limited population. We know how many President Obama did it. We know how many there are. It's a very set, finite population. And so if we were to say upgrade them to a green card or something, we would know what the size of the thing that we're doing is. The DREAM Act that people are talking about, and there's different versions of it in Congress, would open a whole new can of worms. They're not just bigger, more people, maybe 3 or 4 times more people, but we don't actually even know how many people they are. In other words, it's opening a whole new thing.
Is that the problem? Is that one of the biggest challenges for Congress going forward? Because it's in Congress's hands, if you will.
Right. Yeah, it is. I mean, and that's one of the, there's a bunch of things they have to decide. The first one is, are they just going to fix the problem of the people that President Obama illegally, in my opinion, gave work permits to? They didn't know it was illegal. I mean, they, in good faith, did this thing. Companies hired them. So do we fix the problem of this limited population, or do we start a whole new thing from scratch, which is what this DREAM Act thing would do, and not only have a much bigger thing, but give amnesty to many more people, and more people we don't even know how many it's going to be.
There has to be something that takes place. There has to be some type of a solution. And I know you don't have a crystal ball. Any predictions on what could be done? Because like you said, we're talking about a finite population here. We're not talking about overall immigration reform, but are they going to start with this?
Maybe. The important thing is, if they amnesty these DACAs, in other words, the smaller group of population, the smaller finite population, are they also going to take steps to limit the fallout from that amnesty, yes or no? If I was going to predict, and my predictions plus $4 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks, so don't go investing on this.
Notwithstanding taxes.
But if I had to predict, I'm not sure they're going to end up actually being able to get anything through Congress by March, when these people will then start one day at a time, start losing their work permits.
All right, Mark. Well, I think we're going to have you back, because obviously we'll see if they do anything. A lot of people want them to, but their approval rating's not too high, so we're working on that. Mark, thank you so much for joining us, sir. We appreciate it. It's very interesting.
Thank you.
Leland?
Oh boy, what a day it has been. In the past hour or so, the Vice President of the United States walked out of the Indianapolis Colts San Francisco 49ers game because some members of the 49ers team went ahead and took a knee during the national anthem. This is a picture just before the anthem of the Vice President and his wife there. Obviously, Vice President Pence, before this, was governor of the great state of Indiana, spent a lot of time with the Colts and spent a lot of time with the owner of the Colts as well. He also just tweeted out a picture of his hand over his heart. Noteworthy, just to close the loop, this day started with the Twitter fight between Senator Bob Corker and President Trump. It was just a couple of months ago that President Trump, Senator Corker, and Peyton Manning played golf together. Peyton Manning possibly rumored to be running for the Senate in Tennessee. Did he stand or not? We'll look into it and get back to you. Fox News Sunday's next.